Hello and welcome back to Bloodborne. This is the last of the pre-recorded videos, and after this there'll be a lull in actual videos coming out related to this series, at least until I'm back and I can get some fresh footage. In this set I'll be going to Cainhurst Castle, actually one of my favourite areas in the game, and I originally intended to Simon Belmont it up with the Fred Cain because I hadn't used it in a while. Sad thing is about the Cain at this moment is that I put Arcane gems into it, and there are very, very few Arcane gems. And this is the indication of this is where you need to be for to get access to Cainhurst. It's via Hemwick. Because I pointed out the castle when I went through this area last time, that's where we're actually going, or at least the remnants of it. But of course the path is blocked, at least it seemingly is blocked. So, now that we have the invitation, we'll actually be able to get access to that. Cainhurst is one of the more baffling areas in terms of its presence and existence in this game. Again, they don't marry the cosmic and the gothic elements very well together, and everything that's supernatural in Bloodborne doesn't really get terribly much of an explanation. But the general idea is that the lake is the lake that Yharnam's around is associated with secrecy and mystery and hiding things from sight and such. You have that happen with Yaha Ghul, the unseen village, and I imagine it's the same principle used to describe how Cainhurst has been hidden for so long. There are two ways in which you can get unseen, in a sense. The first is to get an invitation to actually go to Cainhurst Castle, so you're cordially invited. And the second is much later in the set. It's a possibility. It's related to the item you get from the boss once you kill the boss. But this is the actual gravestone where you go to trigger the cutscene. So spooky. Now, I'll be honest, instead of just immediately getting on, I kind of dick around a bit, wanting to show off a few things. The first off is that these horses are the same model as the dead horses we've seen in Hemwick Channel Lane, just reused. Again, sort of what's undead and what comes back to life and so on and so forth in this game. Not terribly well explained. It might just be that they were too lazy to change the model. It might be that they actually are undead horses, and that's part of the unseen aspect of hidden supernatural shit, but honestly, they don't explain it terribly well. Now, don't linger around too much in this area, because dogs are still a problem even at this level. I should have followed my own advice and just got in the damn carriage. But it does at least allow me to demonstrate that Beast Roar is a good way to get loads of enemies off you at once. Now, I actually kind of went down this way. Also, you can see that the carriage is actually gone now that I've dicked around so much. And that becomes a bit of a problem later, but anyway. I went down here to indicate that yes, there is absolutely no road where the carriage could have actually come from, and it's going in a dead end anyway. After I'm done pillicking around with this dog. Also, the road doesn't seem to actually, like, be separated from anything. It just seems to jut out into the open sea for some reason. So, where that's actually meant to go when it was actually built, I have no idea. The road that goes over there explicitly leads to the castle in the middle of the lake, but that other way, I have no idea. So yeah, this was the first time this happened, because I usually don't dick around too much, and I was understandably quite confused. But, quitting out like this doesn't actually work. What you have to do is reload the area with a Bold Hunter's Mark. Annoying, but it's an easy rush back anyway, so it doesn't matter too much. So, why do I like Cainhurst Castle so much? Well, again, I like Gothic areas, and it's the last Gothic area really in the game. There's a lot of effort put into the design of it, the facade of the castle, the way it looks, the enemies you see there. It's very ornate, but you also have a lot of cool stuff in there, like the Rite of Lash, the Executioner's Gloves, the Evelyn, and some of the Knight's clothing as well, which is very fancy. And there you can see the carriages back. This time, I make haste. So yeah, things are suddenly very different. There's no pale blood moon, and everything is frozen over and kind of in disrepute. Or repair, I should say. So after that brief interlude into transitioning over here, everything's back to being dead and broken off. And we are basically in the middle of the lake. From here we can see, I believe that's Yaha Ghul over on the right, or it could be Hemel Channel Lane, I'm not too sure. Have a close look. I think... yeah, that area is Central Yharnam to the right and Cathedral Wall to the left. Further down that way being the Forbidden Woods and of course the Bergenworth on the lake. And on the other side is first Unseen Village and then over here I think is Hemel Channel Lane. Just to put into perspective how far everything is in proportion to each other. It's nice that they put such detailed information to the actual skyboxes around the place so you can actually get the feeling that this isn't just some isolated position, it's also part of a collective world that you're exploring. Which is what I liked so much about Dark Souls 1. But anyway, let's see what this area actually is like in the interior. The enemies that are out in this garden are really a hell of a nuisance, and it's the first indication to me in my actual playthrough of this bit that the cane is just not going to cut it with the gems I've got. Which is a shame really, because the importance of gems means you have to keep farming gems, and with arcane builds you have to go into the chalice dungeons. It's all very, very tedious. I really just wish they went with infusions and upgrades in some form, because having to farm a bunch of blood gems, especially when most of them are useless. Like the poisoning gems, absolutely crap. Most of the ones that are just extra damage versus beasts or kin, so situational that you almost never use them, because things like nourishing and tempering, they're way more useful, just overall. They just overshadow everything else. And if you want blood tinged gems, this is a good place to get them. But yeah, those enemies there, getting behind them means you're going to get kicked a hell of a lot, and that hurts. And they also have a very delayed front attack that is there to punish panic rolling. So if you see them instantly move and you roll out the way, it will track you and hit when you out of your iframes. So it's best to keep them at a distance and attack at the sides. But even then, their hitboxes are really fucking weird. This is an enemy I do not like to fight. And you can see why. They're incredibly tanky, incredibly nimble, and if you fight more than one at once, you're screwed. You're just screwed. There's not an awful lot out in this frozen courtyard garden area. although that's giving it a bit too much credit to call it a garden courtyard area. There's a few numbing mists to pick up some madman's knowledge and such, but for the most part, the loot isn't really worth getting. But I decided to show off some things anyway. And there's the kick. It's weird that these enemies are like the way they are. It fits in with the sort of vampire blood-related motif of the area, but it's also an indication that the beast plague, as it were, doesn't just turn people into like weird werewolf kind of people. Like, you have these tick creatures instead, as an indication of what other forms there are, and indeed there are many, instead of just reindeer and wolf. Which is good, it gets away from just having the same tired old wolf-like enemies, because the werewolves in Gothic, am I right? So that's a relief. And now I swap to an actually decent weapon. Although, even doing that, they are still really tanky. And then we have this bizarre, bloated monstrosity, who sounds just lovely. Yeah, these things are sort of like weird mosquito-type enemies that just sort of suck tons of blood until they become so bloated they can't even move. And so you can just attack this one to your heart's content and he can't even do a damn thing about it. Odd box there. Even at the front, he will not even do so much as a swipe because he just cannot move properly. There's something oddly humorous about that, and I just mercilessly slaughtered it. Inside here is well, this is actually the main like hall of the area, and it does look very nice. And you have this weird weeping. There's still some servants like really hastily scrubbing along, just terrified of being anywhere near you, unless you attack them, of course. But then we find out that there are these peculiar ghosts. And thankfully this is not like Dark Souls 1 where you have to get some gimmick item of gimmickness to actually go and fight them. No, you can just whack them with fire, or anything in fact, and they will die. Again, I've made the point before that they don't really explain the presence of ghosts terribly well in this, but yeah, there are ghosts because supernatural. And it's a nice touch because it's an enemy that indicates this area was once very well populated and had loads of people in, but now is pretty much just been cleaned out by the church. And this was originally a weapon I planned to use on this character, because it gets a B in Arcane later on. But it's honestly not really that useful. It's about as fast as the Freddy Cain. It's good for skill builds because it has a solid A in skill, and the gunshot it fires benefits from all 3 blood gems you put in it, so it can get really strong if you do that. But even then, I didn't think it was worth the investment. Like, I wanted to use Ludwig's rifle for the sake of I like blunderbusses in this game, and I hadn't used it before. But with the Rite of Blanche, I figured I wouldn't really use it enough to justify putting the point in. It's pedantic, I know, but it's just I knew it wasn't something I was going to end up using anyway. And in this area here, we actually have quite an interesting bit of attire that we pick up. And yes, you can visceral attack the ghosts. Quite effective. I wonder if we've seen this dress before. Well, isn't that just dandy? Also, Josephine is going to look very fashionable for a while I go and rock this for a while. Just because I was feeling I could do with a bit of a change. So there isn't really much else to go. It's nice to see that the interior area, you see everything's just completely bashed about. It's like it sort of looked like a dinner party got interrupted by some nasty horribleness, which probably is why there's so many ghosts in there. But coming out here, we have this cheeky bugger. Yes, there are indeed gargoyles. These guys, I think, drop Titanite chunks, or they can. Oh, I keep saying bloodstone chunks, even though functionally they are Titanite chunks. They can drop them. They drop twin bloodstone shards more frequently as well. This is actually one of the earliest areas you can get a lot of bloodstone chunks, which is very handy for me. Because I don't want to go to Yahar Ghul until I'm, well, again, until I'm done with the DLC. So it allows me to get my my lovely greatsword up to a fair bit before I actually continue with the main story. And as much as I barely ever use the threaded cane here, it's worth demonstrating it's still pretty good for cheesing through walls or statues. Because its hitbox is fucking ridiculous. Same with the Beast Cutter as well. If you have like a quality build, the Beast Cutter is just amazing. I love it. Yeah, if these guys grab you, it's a nuisance, and they have like a sonic attack, but for the most part, if you whack them enough, they will be knocked on their butts, and you can very easily finish them. Now this guy, despite his frail appearance, he is a massive pain in the ass, because he attacks so quickly. But like any dog enemy, for he is nothing but a fiendish dog, ha ha ha, is he can be knocked down by gunshots or Augur Vibritus, like most things, and there's very little he can do. Another thing you can do is, just because he attacks so often and so quickly, is the instant he gets close to you, just shoot him. Or if you've backed off and you see him attacking, just fire and you'll mostly get the slow attack off. That's really how you can punish a lot of the Bloodborne enemies that just spam attacks, because you can do the equivalent of a parry from a distance. So as long as you back off and fire a gunshot, you can usually punish a lot of the enemies that just go ham and just spam attack you. Oh yeah, and it's worth pointing out that a lot of these statues seem to have crowns of some description. Now that will come evident once we actually fight the boss, but I get the impression that's linked to restricting access to who can actually get into Cainhurst Castle. But that's really more of a theory than anything else. I should have looked. I don't think I looked at the description of the item the boss drops, but I should have if I didn't. And this set offers an explanation as to what actually happened here. Of course, if you remember what Alfred said, he said that the executioners and the Vilebloods are basically fighting each other, and Martelageris led a group of executioners against Cainhurst. So that explains why there's so many like ghosts hanging around where everything's in disarray, and why there's an executioner set here. Which is actually part of my planned fashion born here, because I like how the gauntlets look. Got these nice little what do we call brooches? Anyway, looks quite nice. It's got like a lot of church stuff though. It has terrible frenzy resistance, so it's generally not in your interest to wear a lot of church garb, because frenzy is just such a nightmare to deal with. This item here is pretty much useless to me, but what it is it's basically like the Book of the Guilty in Dark Souls 1. It tells you who's the biggest and baddest of the Vilebloods, hunters and so on, but Honestly, it's kind of useless. Nobody cares about that stuff. I suppose I could make a general point about, like, my impressions of, like, merging single player and multiplayer. I'm honestly not that big of a fan of it, even though I like Dark Souls. And even though I'm not actually that, even though I don't dislike its multiplayer. I've done Invasions a few times, I regularly do co-op when I can. But I'm honestly not that big a fan of mixing single player campaigns with multiplayer because it fucks with the balance and the pacing of the actual games. Like, especially in Dark Souls 3, we can summon, like, what, 4 phantoms or so on? And you can just completely steamroll bosses. Like, what's the fun in that, other than just joking around and laughing at how the game is just poorly balanced? And especially with the invasion systems like the Blue Sentinels and, from what I remember, the what they called, the Wolves of Farron or something, whatever the fuck it's called, and just barely connecting because the conditions are so specific. They've just never really managed to get a decent balance, I don't think, with that. So I honestly don't bother too much with the multiplayer aspect of Souls games or of Bloodborne. I mean, with Bloodborne I don't have PlayStation Plus, so that factors into it quite dramatically. But I'm not really that down on mixing single player and multiplayer. It's just honestly more of a nuisance in my mind. But back to the actual area we're going through. This is the main interior of Cainhurst Castle. Like, over that hallway we go across, like, you may be wondering why and how on earth we got around to that side of the castle with the shortcut. We just went around the top of the archway that goes over the entrance. Finished? Finished, ghosts? Can I talk now? Yeah. That guy who throws the darts at you, he sort of marks you out with those in order to make the ghosts more aggressive. But it doesn't really do that much anyway, so I generally don't fuss with it. But this is the main interior of Cainhurst on the right-hand side, and this is where you can get a lot of the chunks, as well as the things that I'm after, particularly Executioner's Gloves, for they might be fairly useful until I get the Black Sky Eye. But these guys with the canes aren't too bad, but once you have the ones running around with, I think, Rightable Ashes, they're the ones you really want to be worried about, for the same reason as the guy in the hallway. He's the first indicator, because they can very easily do a lot of damage to you very quickly. Thank you, Augur of Abriasis, for continuing to be awesome. But yeah, as you can see, like, he's fast enough to actually interrupt that if I give him enough time. So it's in your best interest to not give them that time. And of course you could take advantage of any range advantage you have with something like Ludwig's Holy Blade or a Rifle Spear. In fact, the Rifle Spear is ideal for enemies like this. Around this main area is basically just more bloodstone chunks, which are very, very useful, especially since it's actually quite hard to get your hands on a lot of chunks until you're quite a way into the rest of the game. For the most part, you only get enough bloodstone chunks around mid to late game for one weapon, and one weapon only. So the earlier you can pick up a lot, the better, because that means you have a lot more of an immediate advantage. It's disappointing, really, that actually getting your hands on bloodstone chunks, and blood rocks especially, is such a pain in the ass. But I suppose at the end of the day, it's meant to encourage you to carefully select which weapons you're actually going to choose to upgrade, and encourage you to make different characters or go through further new game pluses to make more. But I personally don't want to go for more new game pluses with the this character or any of my other characters. Like, this game and Dark Souls 1 forces you into further new game pluses, but you can ignore it for the most part if you want, because Chalice dungeons are unaffected by it. But first off, I hate that it forces you to go into it in the first place if you don't want to. Like Dark Souls 2 and 3 did a good thing by allowing you to choose whether you want to go into it or not. But also there's very little in New Game Plus in Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne in particular to really encourage you to do that. You're just experiencing the same content in more or less the same way. Except that the first few areas are going to be much easier because you have a weapon that can just stomp on everything. So I don't really get why they decided to do that again. I think it's just a bit of an oversight in terms of them not really considering how people play these sorts of games. Nice trap there. Totally don't see that one coming. But that's one of the neat things about this, of course. If you're paying attention, you can very easily turn the trap on the trapper. Now that ladder that I opened up before is the leads up to the boss, and you can very easily just jump over the railing using those movable ladders to actually just jump across, like I'm going to do. I think here or no, not yet. But you can do that to almost immediately just open up Cainhurst and go straight to the boss if you want. Although there is still an awful lot of stuff I like to pick up in this area, so I typically, unless it's something I know I'm not going to use with this the character, I usually go out of my way to pick the stuff up. Now here is where my no death streak comes to something of an end. I think that's the first time I've ever been caught in that sort of ambush either as well, because, well, I usually kill the guy who marks you a lot quicker. But I decided to take things a lot more carefully this time around. Quite understandably. These ghosts without their heads that go and stun you, they're not very common, or at least I haven't really encountered them all that much in Cainhurst, but they are exceptionally annoying because you can see they can stun you very, very easily, and they can spend a long time just doing that. They're about as squishy as the rest of the ghosts, but when they can just do that over and over, it is incredibly annoying to fight these enemies. And this is why I despise enemies that basically are just there to grab you or stop you moving. Because when they're on their own, it's not just a matter of, oh crap, I'm stuck, now I'm gonna get wrecked. It's a matter of, oh crap, I'm stuck, now I'm gonna have to wait for 5 seconds until I get bored. And that's all it ends up being once you're dealing with them individually. But there is some stuff I definitely want in this corridor here. In fact, this is why I've specifically gone out of my way to get it. The Knight's Garb isn't what I was after, but it still looks really swanky anyway. But what I want is on the other side of the room in that chest over there. But first, I wouldn't mind getting my blood echoes back. So there we go. The ghosts don't seem to do that stabbing animation that they do, unless you've been grabbed. So that's at least a relief. But this is what I actually came for. Until the DLC came out, this was the only sort of traditional sort of spell that you would get for an Arcane build, in the sense of a spell that fires projectiles. It is said that nobles found immeasurable delight in the dances of these vengeful spectres, which is very interesting because it's supposed to be an item that's passed down for the executioners. Which does make me wonder to what extent individual executioners and Vilebloods actually disliked each other, and whether there are actually occasions where culturally, socially they mixed. In ways that didn't involve stabbing each other. I don't know. But it's a fairly useful arcane spell. It's costly in a way that makes Black Sky Eye and Accursed Brew in the DLC far more viable, but it's still generally pretty good until you get to that point. It's a homing sort of projectile. I think I demonstrate it on one of the enemies around here, I'm not sure which. But up on this upper level there's a drop of blood gem that increases blood tinge scaling, which is just generally overall useful for guns that you have if you have moderate to high blood tinge, but it's also useful for a specific weapon that you can get from the Vilebloods in this area, and yes, make no mistake, the Vilebloods are still kicking around in some form or another. In fact, that is precisely why Martyr Ligarius is not actually a martyr yet. Or at least technically. But you'll soon see enough about that, I suppose, in the next part. But that's generally it for this hallway area. It's weird that they specifically built a staircase for going up on the roof there, and that's still making renovations. There wasn't really much point in doing that. But yeah, that's what Executioner's Gloves do. They do a fairly decent amount of damage, but not comparatively for their cost, which is a lot better now than it used to be in the vanilla earlier game. But it's again, it's fairly useful. Not so much for the boss of this area, but for later areas where I need a projectile. And that pretty much clears up most of Cainhurst Castle as of now. This wig was originally going to be part of my Fashion Souls and the White Church garb, but I decided against it because as much as the hat's really kind of cute, it has a really naff looking, like, a white ponytail at the back, which I suppose would be fine if my hair was whiter with this character, but otherwise it just looks pretty rubbish. So in the next part I'll actually be fighting the boss of this area, and I'll be showing off some of the other things you can do with the Covenants afterwards. So I will see you then.